Okay, with that bodhicitta in our hearts and minds, we can do the verse of refuge and bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections, and I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So as I mentioned last time, the idea for today is that we'll cover a little bit more of the text we've been studying, which is just, I think, double checking the title. Yeah, Perpetuates, rather, explanation of the presentation of objects and object possessors, as well as awareness and knowers. Awareness and knowers is what I was calling it. But so we're going to cover a little more of that. And as I mentioned last time, then after a little bit more, he goes into minds and mental factors, and he covers them very briefly. And so we'll switch gears and go over to Geshe Gyaltsen's text, which covers that topic in much more detail. But anyway, for now, we'll continue on with Herbert Chook's text. And by the way, when I get to I'll cover just like a few more pages, and then we'll pause and see if there are any questions from any place in the text, in this text. But we're for those who have, I guess, text. Oh, great. So we're on page 26 of the text, and it's there. And I think you'll have it, but it's there. And there's a link there. And so we just finished the section that was on conceptual. Yes, we're going through. We covered conceptual consciousnesses that take a meaning generality as their apprehended object. I hope people remember. So anyway, all conceptual consciousnesses take meaning generalities, right? I remember that from last time. Conceptual consciousnesses, by their definition, take meaning generalities as their apprehended objects. Right? What's that? That's what actually, yeah. And then, and remember, I'm just reviewing just briefly, right? That this is really important. There are a few things that are really important to remember, I think, from this series, this section, or these last few months of classes. One is those different ways of knowing, right? Like, so there are wrong consciousnesses, and there are and so on, right? Wrong consciousness and doubt, and correctly assuming consciousnesses, and then valid inferential cognizers, and direct valid cognizers, and so on. But another point that I think is very important is conceptual consciousnesses, right? What does it mean to be conceptual? As we said last time, it's a consciousness that takes a sound generality, meaning language, right, and a meaning generality as suitable to be mixed. So it's a mind that engages with language and meaning generalities, which we covered last time. So it's more detail. But now we finished that section, and so now we're up to on page 26, the next bold heading, which says non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses that take specifically characterized phenomena as their apprehended object. And pause there, right? So now we're talking about non-conceptual. So non-conceptual are the same as direct, right? Direct cognizers. Direct cognizers, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses. And remember, we're studying. This is I've said this before, but this is coming from the perspective in terms of tenets of Sautantrikas, right? Followers of sutras. And so for them, what's a specifically characterized phenomena? Right? So a specifically characterized phenomena is like a functioning thing. Right? And for them, specifically characterized phenomena are truly existent, right? And are self-existent. Right? And they're actual functioning things. Like so an example of a specifically characterized phenomenon would be a vase, or a book, or a table, or a rock. And for them, those are truly existent phenomena, and they can be objects of. So remember, non-conceptual, right, means it's not being known by way of a language. It's not being known by way of meaning generalities. It's being known directly, right, non-conceptually. So the definition of being a non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness is a knower having a clear appearance that is non-mistaken. Scroll try again. A knower having a clear appearance that is non-mistaken with regards to its appearing object. And a few points to notice there, right? I mean, because as I said before, when they give these definitions, they're often, when Perpetual gives these kinds of definitions, well, he's explaining what this thing is, but he's also, they also define things in a way that can hold up in debate, right? In the monastic debates. So one point here where he says, so I want to ask you to think about it, right? Why does he say, so first of all, right, so a non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness is, first of all, it's a knower, right? So it's an awareness, right? It's a state of mind. Or actually, it doesn't have to be a state. It could be a state of consciousness, a knower. Actually, I got it wrong. See, if I had said mind, actually, this is why I would lose in debate, right? I said it's a mind, right? But it could be an ear consciousness, right? Or a taste consciousness. So better to say a knower. That's why he says knower, right? Because ear consciousness knows sound. Taste consciousness knows taste, right? So that's why he says a knower. Having a clear appearance, and then he says that is non-mistaken. So I want to just pause and think about it. Why is that? I mean, I'll ask you with regard to its appearing object. And so think about, why is that sufficient for this definition? He doesn't have to say, that it's not known by way of a. Why doesn't he have to say it's not known by way of a meaning generality or a sound generality and so on, right? That's true. I already mentioned, right? In other words, non-conceptual means there's no meaning generality, there's no sound generality. But he doesn't have to say all that, right? Because he just says non-mistaken. And I want to remind you why. Because all conceptual consciousness are not non-mistaken with regard to their appearing objects, right? Conceptual consciousnesses are not necessarily wrong consciousnesses. They can know things correctly, right? But they're mistaken in that they take the meaning generality for the thing itself. Right? So here we have, it's a consciousness that's totally non-mistaken, right? So for Sautantrikas, if it's completely non-mistaken, it has to be a direct perceiver, right? Or a non-conceptual consciousness. Because all conceptual consciousnesses know by way of a meaning generality, right? So they have the idea of whatever that specifically characterized phenomena is. And the meaning generality is not the specifically characterized phenomena, right? But they mix them together, or they confuse them to some extent. So you get the idea. Conceptual consciousnesses can be correct in the sense of, if I think of a glass vase, it's correct. There is such a thing as a glass vase. I just went downstairs and I can think of it, and that's not wrong, right? But it's mistaken to the degree that my image of the glass vase is not the glass vase. So here he's saying non-mistaken. That means it's non-conceptual. Right? So there's an implication in that word, and that word, non-mistaken, with regard to its appearing object. And again, I'm just pausing here, because this was covered when he, here it's a different language, right? He's talking non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. Right below, he says the two, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness and directly perceiving awareness, are synonyms. So he covered direct perceivers earlier. So he's kind of going over it and using a different categorization here. So it's not new material really, but he's using a different category. And I just think, because we're coming close to the end of this section, I just want to emphasize, right, that he's reviewing partly to be somewhat exhaustive regarding categorizations, but he's also making a point, I think, which I just want to emphasize is worth remembering, right, which is, because this isn't just an intellectual study, it's for Dharma practice, right? So to remember going forward, my conceptual consciousnesses can be correct, but they're always mistaken, right? That's interesting, isn't it? So to the, like, if I mean, and that's interesting in all different ways, right? But it means, for example, like take the example, I'll just give you a very practical example for a second. Think of someone you know very well. So when you think of them, that's your meaning generality, right? And now, if you know them well, you're probably not having a wrong consciousness, right? You're thinking of that person, you're going, oh yeah, that's so-and-so. That's not a wrong consciousness, right? But it's mistaken in the sense that your meaning generality in your mind about them is not them, right? And if you notice your own experience, your meaning generality of that person will change, will appear different ways. When you're mad at them, it'll appear one way. When you're craving, missing them, it'll appear a different way, and so on. But it's never completely non-mistaken in the sense that it's never the actual person. Anyway, I think that's very meaningful. So I just wanted to, if he's saying it here, I think that's part of why he's reviewing it. John has a comment or a question.
I don't think it's a comment, it's a question, I guess. If I heard you correctly, I heard you say it has to be mistaken. So it's a given, it has to be mistaken. It cannot possibly be right.
It's a tricky point, I think. It can be, I would say it this way, actually. It can be right and it's still mistaken. That's the tricky part here. Like, so if I think, I'll give an example. If I think John is a man, that's right. In other words, that's right. But what we're getting at here is that my meaning generally, so my concept of you is not you. So it's mistaken in that way. So it can be correct, but it's also mistaken.
But even if you're looking at me, you're still using your eyes to make it non-conceptual. But your brain still has to interpret the neuron transmission that goes on in your electrical system of your body, your nervous system, to transfer from your eyes to your head. So even that is still conceptual, I guess. And even when you physically have an example, I guess they can all be wrong, I think. And does this school say that if you're physically looking at me and say I'm a man, then it's absolutely right and not mistaken? Where if you just think of it, then it is one but not the other?
Great question. I mean, that's what, now we're starting to see the implications of this definition. This is great, so it's good. So what this is getting at, right, is what just below it says, a sense, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. That's what you're getting with the eyes, right?
Right.
So these are divisions of. So at this school, according to this school, right, and this is different than the Prasangikas. The Prasangikas have a different position on some of these issues. But here we're doing the Sautantrika version. So what they would say is, like, if I look up and see you, that's with my eye consciousness, right? That would be a sense, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness.
Mhm.
And what they would say is that as long as there's not some cause of error, like I'm not having an eye disease or some other kind of sensory problem, if there's not a problem with my sensory apparatus, then they would say that is a non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness that takes a specifically characterized phenomena, right? Meaning a momentary, impermanent phenomena, which is you're momentary and impermanent, according to this, according to all Buddhist schools, actually. So they would say that's completely non-mistaken. Then they would say, going to your point, this is the way they would say it. They would say, then there's a very brief moment that ordinary beings don't perceive, but Aryas do, but all beings have it. That there's a very brief moment after my eye consciousness perceives your face, let's say, that there's a mental non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. That's where the mental consciousness directly perceives your face, right? So there's a kind of and they would say that's also non-mistaken, and it's directly perceiving in a totally non-mistaken way a specifically characterized phenomena, which is the momentarily impermanent your face, let's say.
Mhm.
Then let's say I have a thought. Oh, that's John. He's a nice man. That's a conceptual knower now, right? That's a meaning, like, so there's language there, right? Oh, I'm labeling John. And I'm thinking, oh, he's a nice man, let's say, right? So that's conceptual consciousness. And at that point, it's a meaning generality. And so they would say that while it's a correct consciousness, in other words, I think it's a valid, I think that's correct consciousness that you are a nice man. So it's correct. It's a, it's not wrong, but it's mistaken because at that point, I start to mistake my concept of you for you. So in that sense, it's mistaken to that degree. So it's not wrong in the sense that, I'm not, it would be, if I thought you were a giraffe, that would be a wrong consciousness, right? But I don't think that. I think, oh, you're a nice man. So that would be it's not a wrong consciousness, but it's mistaken in that I begin to confuse my concept of you with you. And part of that is that the concept of you, as I've mentioned before, is static, whereas the actual you is momentarily impermanent. That's one of the ways that they're different. And so we confuse those two. So that's the sense which is mistaken. Does that kind of get it, what you were asking? Okay. So that's this tenet system's view on that topic. And then Lynn has a comment or a question.
Is another way that it's different is that the sense impression is immediate and the conceptual follows it. So one is immediate and the second is the conceptual follows it. It doesn't happen instantaneously.
Yeah, in that instance, that's right. Yeah, it's a second. Yeah, it comes after. Okay. Yeah. Other comments or questions about that part? And then next, he covers the divisions of non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses. I don't think we probably don't need to go over that because it was covered already on page 5, where there was on page 5 they were talking about direct perceivers, and it's the same, or direct perceiver. He just said direct perceivers and non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness are synonyms, right? Here, he just said that they're synonyms. So on page 5, he covered this same categorization, right? The category. There's the the 4 categories of direct perceivers are therefore the same 4 categories as the categories of non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. So I'll just remind you, right? One is sense. We just covered that, right? Sense, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness would be, my example was eye consciousness, seeing a face, right? Then the mental, I just gave an example of that, right? That brief moment is one example. Another mental, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness would be clairvoyant mind. Then self-knowing, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. That's the self-knowers that are, that this school says account for memory, which we're going to cover again in a few minutes, and in a minute. And then there are yogic, direct, perceiving, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses. And then he says here, since they were already explained above, one should know this, right? So he's saying it was covered on page 5. And remember, though, yogic direct perceivers are, in this tenet system, right? Those are yogic direct perceivers can know subtle impermanence, and they can know gross or subtle selflessness of persons, right? Those are the yogic. So when the yogi or yogini directly perceives those truths, that would be an example of a yogic direct perceiver that's non-conceptual, right? So when, and that's the difference between a conceptual realization of, say, selflessness, and then there's a direct realization of it. So those are different. But this here, yogic direct perceiving, non-conceptual, non-mistaken would be where there's no, that's an important point, right? Just for practice, I just remind people of that, right? That up to a certain point, we realize things like impermanence or selflessness or emptiness by way of mental images, right? Or meaning generalities. But there comes a point where one knows those things directly. And directly means non-conceptual here, right? So anyway, the yogic direct perceiver would be that, where one knows it directly. Then the next category here are non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses that take a clear appearance of a non-existent as their apprehended object. Right. So this is, so so what's a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, right? Pause and think about that for a moment. Right. A non-conceptual, so now, right, the mistaken consciousness that takes a clear appearance of a non-existent as its apprehended object. So we'll keep going. I'm saying to contemplate that for a moment. With regard to the third, the threefold division of awareness and knowers, non-conceptual, non-mistaken, a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness that can take a clear appearance of a non-existent as its apprehended object. There are the definitions and the divisions. So the first, the definition of something being a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness is a knower having a clear appearance that is mistaken with regard to its appearing object. And right, and I think I just want to pause and reflect on this, right? It's as this text and other Buddhist texts do quite nicely, I think. It's saying a knower that has a clear appearance, right? Oops. Yeah. So we're just point, like, it has a clear appearance of something, right? And that thing is non-existent. And part of the point, I just want to pause here, right? Like, so I just think, again, this is really interesting from an introspective practice perspective, right? Because sometimes we have a clear appearance of something. Right? What it's getting at is, actually, it's quite subtle, isn't it? When you have a clear appearance of something, it is appearing to your consciousness, right? To a consciousness. Does that mean it exists? No. And so, and that, I don't want to remind, or just, I mean, it's just fun to think about, right? Here we're talking about non-conceptual, right? But there are, as we've already talked about, there are conceptual consciousnesses that have a clear appearance of things that are non-existent, right? An example of that would be self, right? A truly existent, or would be a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, right? That would be a conceptual consciousness that has a clear appearance of something, right? My own self-sufficient, substantially existent self, right? That appears to that consciousness, but that doesn't exist, right? So here this is pointing out there are also non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses, right? That have clear appearances of non-existence. So we'll keep going, and he's going to explain. So he says, the divisions. When non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses are divided, there are two: sense consciousnesses that are non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses, and mental consciousnesses that are non-conceptual. This also actually was covered earlier, so I'll just briefly review it, right? But with a sense consciousness that's mistaken, right? Or you could say that's mistaken, or as he puts it, that takes a non-existent as its apprehended object. There are different, remember on page 11, actually, it covers this, but there are causes of error, and they talk about causes of error, right? And the cause of error can be in the basis, in the abode, or in the immediately preceding condition. Those are the different types of causes of error. But actually, a simple example of a sense consciousness, right, is if a person is having an eye problem and they see two moons, right, on this planet. Some planets that would be a correct consciousness. But if you're on the Earth and you look up and you see two moons, right, there's a problem with your eyes, right? So you're having a clear appearance. I'm just giving an example. You're having a clear appearance that's mistaken, right? And what's it? It's apprehending a non-existent, right? Two moons are non-existent, but you're apprehending them. And there is, you get the point here. There's a clear appearance of something, but it doesn't exist, right? That'd be an example of that, right? Or if somebody had, or the example that came earlier, and this was the immediately preceding condition, right? Is if somebody's like completely overwhelmed with rage, and they see everything as red, right? In other words, it's a clearly appearing to their eye consciousness as red, but it doesn't exist as red. It's a problem that from the immediately preceding condition. In that case, the preceding condition was their own rage, right? And it's appearing it's not appearing conceptually, it's appearing non-conceptually, right? The two moons are actually appearing to the eye. You're not just making it like, that's not like where somebody lays down and imagines two moons, right? This is where they look up in the sky. There's a sense conscious, right? They look up in the sky and they actually see two moons. So they're actually with a sense conscious perceiving something that doesn't exist there, right? So the cause of error in that case is in the organ, right? The sense organ. If somebody has tinnitus, that'd be an example, right? They're hearing a ringing, right, sound, but there's no, so in other words, their ear consciousness, and this is an example of a sense consciousness, right? That's mistaken, right? So the person's hearing a ringing sound, but there's no, going back to the phrase earlier, there is no specifically characterized phenomena that exists that's a sound that's ringing, right? It's a problem in the ear organ. So those are examples of sense consciousnesses that are non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, right? So you get the point here why I said they have a clear appearance of something that doesn't exist, right? Of a non-existent. And then there are mental consciousnesses that are non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses. And the example from page 11 that I'll remind people of was the example he gave there was a person who dreams of blue, and then in the dream believes that there's, not just believes, but experiences an external blue, right? There is, but that is, so it has a clear appearance, but it's a non-existent, right? There is no external blue. If you dream of a blue car, for example, that doesn't, and then you wake up and you think, oh, I dreamt of a blue car, but there was no blue car there, right? That would be an example. Or if you dream of oh, last night I dreamt of my father's passed away. Last night I dreamt of my father. I just remembered that, right? So that would be an example of him, right? So I saw him in the dream, and I think I felt him. It was touching, but my shoulder or something. But so in like those are examples where anyway. But in the dream, it was the eye conscious. What they're getting at there is that the eye consciousness is not functioning when you're dreaming, right? So it's a mental appearance. And it's a mental appearance of a non-existent because my father wasn't there. So that would be those are examples of mental consciousnesses that are mistaken, right? Because they believe the thing is there, but it's not there. And Brahi is.
maybe I should do a little more reading, but I'm just confused about when a sense consciousness is wrong versus mistaken, because on page 24, it uses the example of a sense, direct perceiver being wrong when you look at a mountain and you see a blue mountain and in fact it's white. But I don't understand the distinction with a sense direct perceiver being mistaken versus wrong.
So we're on page 24. I just want to go back.
On 24, I'll have to go back there. Hold it. Can you give me a second?
Sure. It looks like 20. Oh, I see.
It's on the book. Oh, wait a minute.
On the very top, maybe?
No, actually, you know what? I apologize. It's at the top. Examples of the second wrong consciousness that are sense consciousness are a sense consciousness which sees snow mountains as blue and a sense consciousness that sees a white conch as yellow. It's at the top of page 24.
So, and those would be examples of wrong
And they're
consciousness
examples of
variations.
wrong.
Right.
So what's the difference between that and a yeah, I'm not making the distinction between that and a sense direct perceiver that's mistaken.
I think that that for this, I think is an important distinction. So with a I think this is true. So I'll say my position on that, and then see if we can double check it. But my position on that would be, if it's a sense consciousness, then if it's mistaken, it's also wrong, and if it's wrong, it's also mistaken. Whereas with a conceptual consciousness, it can be mistaken without being wrong. So I think that's a distinction. I think my own position would be with a direct perceiver. If it's mistaken, then it must also be wrong. But I think with a conceptual consciousness, of course, it can be mistaken but not wrong, as I just mentioned, in response to the comment earlier, because it can be, because not all, because all conceptual knowers are mistaken with regards to their appearing object, but they're not all wrong consciousnesses. Example, if I think of a glass vase, I just gave that example a few minutes ago, right? But I think, and part of the reason, I'll say why I would hold that position. If you go back to page 26, we just covered this. It says, the definition of a non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness, right, or direct perceiving awareness, is a knower having a clear appearance that is non-mistaken with regard to its appearing object. So there, so any, so I think if it's a sense consciousness, if it's mistaken, then it's going to be wrong, because by definition it's having an appearance of a non-existent. So I'm pretty sure that's right. Oh, you're muted. Right.
Let's say I see you.
Yeah.
It's correct. It's not wrong because I'm seeing you, but it's mistaken because I'm seeing an inherently existent you.
No, now you're getting into, that's a Prasangika
Okay, so knock that out. Okay.
So that would not be, that would be that's a Prasangika position. Whereas this school would say, actually, this school would say, you're seeing, with your eye consciousness, you're seeing an inherently existent me, and that's correct, because there is according to this school, Sautantrikas, there is an inherently existent
Okay.
me. And actually, all non-Prasangika views would, anyway, all non-Majjhimikas would say there is an inherently existent person. So so that, and I think you're getting at a point which I'll just note very briefly. It's kind of a side point, but Prasangikas, right, as you just hinted at, say that direct perceivers are mistaken, but Sautantrikas say they're non-mistaken because they're perceiving things that are specifically characterized phenomena. And for them, specifically characterized phenomena are ultimate truths.
Okay.
And are ultimately true. So that's a difference, actually. So yeah, so we have to not confuse the Prasangika position, so because that would be a different.
So if okay, I get that, but let's say I'm seeing you and I'm seeing a permanent, unitary, independent person, then is that mistaken?
And this is important. So for this school, like when the I consciousness sees form, right? It's perceiving a specifically characterized phenomena, and it's non-mistaken. Then, getting what you're getting at there, right? What they would say is that then a conceptual knower has an appearance of a self-sufficient, substantially existent
Okay.
person. And that conceptual knower is a wrong consciousness, right? It's perceiving a non-existent. And so so according to this school, the knower that would be knowing the self-sufficient, substantially existent self would always be a conceptual wrong consciousness, right? Which is and it's a conceptual, and it's a wrong consciousness because it's perceiving it has a clear appearance of a non-existent, right? Which is the self-sufficient, substantial in itself. But this school would say the eye consciousness or the ear consciousness or the tongue consciousness don't have an appearance of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. They have just the appearance of specifically characterized phenomena, which are non-mistaken appearances, according to this school. So it'll be a conceptual consciousness apprehending a non-existent, which would be a self-sufficient, substantially in self. That's the cause of samsara, according to this school, actually, right? And that must be overcome to attain liberation. Does that make sense? No, or is that instant?
Yes, yeah.
It's subtle distinctions, isn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes the way, and it is subtle.
And you see now, actually, I just want to point out one more thing related to your question, Bri, which is, and now one starts to see, like, on the one hand, how this school helps one avoid nihilism, right? Because it's sort of, you're trying to overcome this idea of a self-sufficient, substantial in self, but you're not refuting appearances, right? And you're not challenging sensory appearances. You're saying those are, in a sense, those you leave alone. They're, as we say here, they're non-mistaken according to this school. And then you can start to, if you contemplate the Prasangika, which is what you mentioned there, right, where you say, because Prasangika say, because of our past imprints of ignorance, things even appear to our direct perceivers as if they were inherently existent, which they're not. So there's an element of mistaken appearance. That's much more radical. And you can see how, like, you can start to actually get the sense of, they sometimes say, in Madhyamaka text and in the Prajnaparamita, they say that beings can be afraid of emptiness. And you can see how that would be, like, when you think of how radical it is, the Prasangika perspective, although it's correct according to Tsongkhapa and all Tibetan schools, it's quite radical, and you can see the difference now a little bit better, right? Between that, they wouldn't say totally non-mistaken, right? About non-conceptual consciousnesses. Whereas this school says, they're non-mistaken, and leaves that alone in a way. Good. Any other comments or questions about what we've covered so far? Good.
Yeah, maybe this is related to the Madhyamaka discussion, but is a specifically characterized phenomena, is that the same as a dependent imputation? What would be?
That's interesting. According to this school, right, if you say like a specifically characterized phenomena would be correct. Like, so it's a, so in other words, a specifically characterized phenomena, they would say, I think, is a, is a dependently arisen phenomena, or they would call it a, what's it called, dependently arisen, or a, conditioned phenomena. That arose due to causes and conditions and is a functioning thing. But they wouldn't say, this school would not say imputed. That would be the difference, or a difference from the Prasangikas, because, this school would say, part of the definition of a specifically characterized phenomena, according to this school, is that it can, it performs a function from its own side. And they would say, like, and they, and you can see their position. They would say, like, so for example, like a seed will produce a, like a grass seed will produce a grass plant from its own side, and they would say, and it doesn't matter if you label it or you don't label it, it will still perform its function from its own side, because because it's dependently arisen. It rose due to a previous grass plant that then, so they would say it's dependently, it arose in dependence upon causing conditions, but they would say it has its own entity, that it functions from its own side. So they would say it is dependent, but they would say it's not, it's not imputedly existent because it functions from its own side.
Okay.
And that's of course different than the Prasangikas, who would say it exists in mere name, right, or exists merely labeled. So that's a difference. Does that get at what you were?
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, you can really see how, it's interesting. You can see, if we think from a Prasangika perspective, of course, we can see why they would say it's merely labeled, right? But also from this school's perspective, you can see why they would say, well, wait a second, things do function from their own side, and that, and they give the example, a seed produces a plant from its own side, or a, whatever, like water moistens from its own side. It's not because you label it that it moistens, or that it moistens the ground. When the sand, when the ocean waves go onto the sand, it moistens the beach, and that's not. They would say that's not imputedly existent. In other words, it happens from its own side, and it produces effects, which are that then sand crabs can go in there, and so on. Whatever, all different kinds of things happen. Anyway, it's a difference, but. So those are different. Those are differences in these tenet systems. My point, I guess. Yeah. Which are interesting to think about. Yeah, it's just, again, I often say, when we covered tenets, I was saying this, like, I think it's quite useful because it, if you think about the difference between the tenets, then you go, well, why? Then you have to ask again, well, why would I agree with the Prasangikas, and why would this school disagree with the Prasangikas, for example? And that becomes useful. To contemplate, and then you have to go, why do I believe one and not the other, and to really think about it deeply, and then also, as I said, and sometimes in a given moment to ask, like, which is more helpful to my practice in this moment, for example, because all the tenet systems were taught by the Buddha, so sometimes they say that, right? Even if the Prasangika perspective is the most subtle, and the ultimate intent of the Buddha did, for example, taught the Sautrantrika tenet system because actually he taught it because it's more helpful to beings at certain points in their spiritual development, right? Otherwise he wouldn't have taught it. So, and beings include us, so it's an interesting question, right? When is the Sautrantrika perspective more helpful to me in my practice is a good question also. And when is the Madhyamaka, for example, most helpful to me in my practice? Those are good, those are useful. I think I said that once. No, it wasn't Sautrantrika, but I remember once I was talking to a very dear friend, and he was saying, like, when he was practicing Mahamudra, he said he was, he had studied Madhyamaka quite a bit, and then he was saying he decided for the time being, he said to me one day, he said, for the time being, I find that for my Mahamudra practice that I want to be I'm going to be a Chitamatran. He said, because it helps my practice more for now. And so he said, so, he said, I know my guru would say Madhyamaka is the correct view, and I'll come around to that. But for now, I'm going to be this because it's helping my practice in actual, when I sit in the morning, that's what's helping me practice better. And I was like, I thought that was really wonderful, that he could see from his own experience that was helping his actual morning practice. It wasn't that he was going to disagree with the Madhyamaka perspective or say it's wrong, but he was saying this is more helpful right now. I thought that was quite, I don't know, I think that's, anyway, good. I thought that was wonderful when he said that. Anyway, okay, come back. So then, yes, okay. Then it says definition of a non. Okay, and we've covered this before, so we'll just go very quickly. He says the definition of the first, a sense consciousness that is non-conceptual, mistaken consciousness, is that which is the common locus of being a non-conceptual, mistaken consciousness and being produced in dependence upon a physical sense power that is uncommon empowering condition. And so we just said that, right? So basically I just said like the problem is in the, right, why is it mistaken? If it's a sense consciousness that's mistaken, it's because of, I said the organ, but here he's saying the sense power, right? So, and remember this phrase, uncommon empowering condition. Why is it uncommon? It's uncommon because like only the eye sense power is uncommon in the sense that only the eye sense power produces, visual sense appearance. Only the ear sense power produces auditory. Only the nose sense power produces olfactory. So they're uncommon in the sense that each sense power produces its own kind of. And remember, the sense power is a physical phenomena, right? Whereas the sense consciousness is mental, right? So it's a sense conscious. So it's a consciousness that is produced in dependence upon something physical, right? So a physical sense power, meaning one of those senses. And then that's different from the mental, right? So it says the mental consciousness, that is the non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, is the common locus of being a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness and being produced that depends upon the mental sense power that is uncommon empowering condition. So in that sense, right, it's not dependent upon one of the sense, physical sense powers, right? Not the eye sense power, the ear, the nose, the touch, or something, but upon the mental. The mental is the uncommon empowering condition for that, right? And so and I remember like when one of the physical sense powers is the uncommon empowering condition, right? It means like, like the ear sense power hears, plays a role in allowing the mental, the ear sense power plays a role, a required role, right? An uncommon empowering role in allowing the ear consciousness to hear. Whereas in the mental, it's that the previous moment of mental consciousness is the uncommon empowering condition that allows the mind to know something. So there has to be a previous moment of mind that allows the next moment of mind. So the mind that's falling asleep, right? And that's then in deep sleep. Let's say you're going to have a dream of something, right? Like then it would be like the mind of deep sleep might be the uncommon empowering condition that then allows for a dream to arise in that case. So that would be when the mind, mental sense power, is the uncommon empowering condition. Yep. And then the last thing here, which we won't spend very long on in this text, the last thing in this text is a twofold division: self-knowers and other knowers. We've kind of covered this already. So it's and I remember, so a self-knower is a consciousness directed only inward. And remember, sense power, self-knowers, I said this before, but I'll just mention it again because it could be confusing, I think. That self-knowers are not what we think of as introspection. It's not self-reflective and sort of contemplating yourself or something. Here, self-knower just means it's an automatic, according to this tenet system, which other, Madhyamikas will disagree with. But Tantrikas say, the self-knower is kind of an automatic process in the mind of the mind knowing that it knows, or aware that it knows, that allows for memory, right? So a self-knower is directed only inward, meaning only a consciousness, whereas other knowers are consciousness turned outward. And then it points out examples of other knowers are sense consciousnesses, mental consciousnesses, yogic direct perceivers, as well as conceptual consciousness. Those are all other knowers. Whatever is any of those, a sense direct perceiver, a mental direct perceiver, a yogic direct perceiver, or a conceptual consciousness must be an other knower. So it's just, that's another way of dividing awareness is really all. And that's specifically just, again, really for this tenet system, self-knowers are how they account for memory. So they say the fact that you can the fact that you can remember you knew something or experienced something or saw something, they attribute that to self-knowers, and Majamikas don't, but that's just the difference. So I'm going to pause there and ask, because then we're going to switch over to the other text. I'm going to ask, are there any questions about, we can spend it, we can just switch over or we can pause and look back, but I think that's what we'll cover in this text, actually, of Perpachoke's, because again, now you're going to see he mentions main mind and then mental factors, and that's covered in much greater detail in Geshe Gelsen's text. So I think it doesn't make sense to cover it twice, because this is a brief treatment and this is a more detailed treatment. So, and I looked in the other commentaries, they did that too. They just switched over to the other text usually because it covers everything in greater detail. But are there any questions about this material from this text before we switch over? Yeah, Lynn.
I'm just trying to correlate this section we just went over with page 11, because that had clairvoyance and memory, right? Memory and clairvoyance that are non-conceptual mistaken consciousness. But are those mistaken or not mistaken?
Let's go back to, so page 11, I went there. Which, where on page 11 are you?
The 4 that you went over. Let's see if I can.
Oh, the cause of basis, the error existing in the basis, the abode, the object, or the immediate preceding condition. That, so those 4, you mean?
I think it was Varahi. There were 4. Oh, here, it's the previous page, I guess. Oh no, maybe it's not.
Because there's a list of 4 on page 11. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right list of 4. So to make sure I get what you're asking.
It's not there. It's sense impressions, and 3 of the sense impressions are, one was memory, one was clairvoyance, and then there was yogic.
Oh,
Direct. But if I understand correctly, you're saying those are mistaken.
I'm just trying to see which. I'm not sure which. Do you know which?
I'm trying to get back to it. I'm not.
I don't want to answer the wrong question.
There was a list of 4, and my understanding is they were sense impressions, not mental impressions. And if I understand this, let's see.
I'm trying to see someplace around there where it talks about clairvoyance.
Yeah.
I don't,
There was a list of 4, and the first was a mental consciousness, and the way I understood it, the other 3 were sense consciousness. One was clairvoyance, and one was yogic perception. Let's see. Oh, here, it's on the bottom of page 26. See, I was way off.
Oh, 26.
These are non-mistaken, non-conceptual. So first there's a sense perception, then there's the mental, which is clairvoyance. Now these are non-mistaken.
Oh, I see. So non-mistaken, I see. So you're looking at the bottom of page 26 where it talks about non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses.
Right. And one's the mental one on 2 is clairvoyance.
Okay,
So
I see. So that wouldn't be sense. So a mental, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. An example of that could be clairvoyance. That's correct, but that wouldn't be sensory. That would be mental. So that would be like and that would be where a person can correctly. It's like they talk about, for example, someone who has calm abiding, let's say, can have clairvoyance where they can actually see what's like with their mind, they can directly perceive what somebody else is thinking or feeling.
right, or
And so
knowing
that would be,
what's going on someplace else, right?
yeah, and so that would be a mental knower, and so that would not be sensory though. That would be a mind. That would be their mind. That their mind perceives correctly, what's happening. Let's say in somebody else's experience. So that would be a mental non-conceptual because they're not conceptualizing about it. They're actually perceiving it with their mind.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
Okay.
so that's right. That would be that would be like a direct it's the non-conceptual, non-mistaken, which you could say is a direct perceiver, a mental direct perceiver. So is that, that would be that.
So that's non-mistaken. Is that also, how would you say, not wrong in this school?
Right. Yeah, that would not be a wrong kind. That would be a correct consciousness. Yeah.
Okay. And then the same thing for the memory, number 3.
Self-knowing. Yeah. So here what they're getting at, the self-knowing non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness would be like, that would be like, let's say for an example of that is like, if, or like say, in this moment, if you are looking at your computer screen, let's say, right? And then there's a part of what they would say is in that moment, there's a part of your mind that directly sees you're looking at a computer screen. So that later you'll be able to remember that. And they would say that is non-mistaken. In other words, it's just a part of your mind that is aware that you're actually experiencing a visual consciousness looking at a computer screen. And they would say that's non-mistaken and it's non-conceptual because you're not thinking that you're looking at a computer screen. It's just a kind of part of your mind that's aware that you're experiencing that will allow you to remember it later. So they would say that's non-conceptual and it's a mental kind. But they would say that's actually they don't label it mental. It is mental, but they label it self-knower.
But you could also get that with self-conscious, a sense consciousness. Like you hear a piece of music and you know what it is because you've heard it before.
Oh, yeah. And I guess, one thing you have to differentiate, I guess, is the self-knower is in the present. And then, so you have to differentiate 2 different things, like, because about memory, I think there's one point that maybe I didn't say clearly, which is that the self-knower is always in the present moment. And then when you remember it, that's not the self-knower, that's a result of the self-knower. So like, let's say in the present, like if a person's, say a person's at a symphony and they're listening to Mozart, right, being played or something, I'm going to use an example here. Their ear consciousness, right, is having a direct perceiver, a sense direct perceiver of the music, right? That's a sense direct perceiver that's non-conceptual and non-mistaken. At the same moment, there's a part of their mind that's a self-knower that's aware they're listening to, that they're hearing sound. And that's the self-knower in that present moment. Now later, if they're, say, someplace and they think of that experience and they remember hearing Mozart, that wouldn't be the self-knower, that would be memory. And that would be a result of that previous self-knower. So the previous self-knower allowed for the memory, but that experience of memory is not in and of itself a self-knower, to be clear. Like the self-knower was what they experienced while they were sitting in the audience and listening. But when they remember it, that's not the self-knower, that's the result. So if they think, oh, that was really wonderful that time I went and listened to Mozart, that would be a memory that would not be a self-knower, it would be a result of a self-knower.
Okay.
But, and yeah, these 4 are divisions, right, of, we could say, I'm going to just say divisions of directly perceiving awarenesses, right? Or you could say divisions of non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. Those are synonyms, right? So those are the 4 types of direct perceivers: sensory, mental, like a clairvoyance, as you said, self-knowers, and yogic. So yeah, those are the 4 types of direct perceivers, and all of those are non-mistaken. But is that getting, I don't know, is there more to your question, or is that answering?
Yeah, so those are non-mistaken.
Yep.
And the yogic is obviously non-conceptual, direct perceiver. That perceives something as impermanent.
Yeah,
Direct.
impermanent or selfless. Yep.
Okay, or selfless. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, any other questions about any of this before we go on, actually? Oh, Anna.
Yeah, oops. I have a question. So does the is taken from the direct perceiver, so from the sense and from mental. So is this how do we distinguish between the illusion of this dissolution? For example, we know everything from mental senses. Mental is all illusion. But from the sense, from eye sense, then we see the things exist because, for example, I see a flower in the garden. So the flower is there, but I mentally think the flower is beautiful, but other people, they don't think it's beautiful. So that would be a delusion, right? For them from the mental, but from the sense, it's direct perceiver, there will be no delusion because it's there. The flower is there in the garden.
So let me see if I understand what you're asking, because I want to make sure I get it. Like, I think, because then again, we're doing from the Sautantrika perspective, because it's different than the Majjhimika. So I'm going to answer from the Sautantrika, this school's, this tenet system. But I think what you're getting is that, like, according to this tenet system, it's quite complicated, isn't it? Like, one point is that when you see a flower in the garden, right, with your eye consciousness, you're seeing what they call it, I said it, a specifically characterized phenomena. And according to this school, that exists, right? It exists in that moment. It's momentary, it's changing, right? And your eye consciousness is perceiving it correctly as it is, according to this school. So so as part of what you're getting at, that, like, when the eye consciousness, let's say, sees something, like, according to this school, you're pointing out that's without delusions. It doesn't have to have a delusion anyway. It could be very simple.
Mm-hmm.
But then, I guess, is what you're getting at, that then, let's say, because I think what this school would say, for example, right, is that then, let's say I start to become attached to, like, my flower. Then that's the mental consciousness developing attachment, right? And that the mental afflictions come from the mental consciousness. Is that what you're getting at there? Or more, is there more to it you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, everything from mental is a delusion, but from six other 5 senses, like from ear, from eye, that's a direct perceiver. So it's no delusion according to this school, right?
That's true. I guess the one thing I would add, though, is, like, I mean, just because we were just covering it, in this school, there are examples of mental direct perceivers that would not be delusion, but an example of that would be, like, clairvoyance. Like a clairvoyant, so if a person was clairvoyant and they could read somebody else's mind, that's not delusion, because they're just seeing what's happening in the other person's mind. But then, so there are examples of mental direct perceivers that are not deluded, according to this tenet system, like clairvoyance is an example. But you're right, though, otherwise, that right, according to this school, all the mental afflictions are mental, right? They come from the mind. One thing I'll ask to think about, though, is, like, so I want to think about an example, though, like, it's an interesting question, like, because, like, let's say we have a concept of a flower, using your example, right? So when the mind, when the eye conscious perceives flower, it's according to this tenet system, that's just correct, right? It's a valid cognizer, and there is no element of delusion in that, of mental affliction. Then when you say that's a flower, right, even before you say it's beautiful, if you just say that's a flower, that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's a conceptual knower, right? So that's a mental knower that's conceptual. And as I was saying earlier, that's not wrong because it is a flower, but it's mistaken because you have an idea of a, right, you have a mental image of a flower, but we confuse it with the flower. So it's already starts to be mistaken, but it's not necessarily wrong.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right?
So because you start to differentiate, I
Yeah.
mean, flower, you think it's beautiful, but other people may think it's ugly. So you differentiate, then you have attachment. You think, this is my flower, not yours. So that's attachment and differentiate. So that will be our illusion coming.
Yeah, and then you can, and right, and then you can see how from there, then you can develop anger, right? Oh, this person, I'm angry. Yeah, you're right. That's how it starts, right? Then you think it's my flower. Then this person doesn't like it. Then I don't like that person, right? Then you have anger at that person, and so on. Then you could have pride. I have best flowers, and other people have less good flower, right? So yeah, all the mental afflictions come that way. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
you're right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's where all the mental afflictions start to come in. Good point, Anna. Yeah. Yeah, other comments? These are good. All the comments and questions are quite good. But yeah, and you get the sense, right? I mean, I think what I just want to point out, I think what I was just getting at is really important point, right? Which is, you know, by looking at these teachings, we start to see how we give rise to the mental afflictions, right? And that's the ultimate point, isn't it? That these teachings are tools for us to observe our own mind and see the process by which we give rise to delusions, and also how we can undo them, how we can fix them. So anyway, I think it's quite good. Well, maybe if people don't have questions, so we'll stop there with Herbachok's text, and we'll switch over. So, and it was in the chat already. We gave out this text earlier, and then also I think the link. Yeah, I know the link is in the chat. But so I'll just introduce today. We're not going to go very far in it, but I'll introduce another text. So it's called A Necklace for Those of Clearer Awareness, Clearly Revealing the Modes of Minds and Mental Factors. And it's by Yeshe Gyaltsen. And he was like a teacher, I think, of the 8th Dalai Lama. And he was famous Mahamudra master in the Lugpa tradition. Yeah, so. Actually, I think I remember a story that I think he was quite, I think Pabonka Rinpoche tells a story, I think this is Yeshe Gyaltsen, where he was like quite poor, and from like he was kind of, as a young person, was quite in difficult circumstances. And it's kind of like, I don't know, you think he told the story where people kind of put him down, and then later in life, he was the teacher of the Dalai Lama, and everybody was kind of, you know, so people who had put him down earlier were like, oh, wow, you're so great. He kind of would laugh. I think I remember Pabonka Rinpoche telling a story like that, if I remember right. But there's a little bit of time, so maybe what we can do is just, so first I just want to introduce an idea, which is, this is a little bit, I'll just kind of do a little bit of introduction. First of all, so mind and mental factors is another way of looking at mind, right? So we're on the same general subject, which is looking at how the mind works. But this is a little different, actually. The low rig, right, awareness and knowers, mainly comes from the, as I've said, from the Pramana teachings, right? The teachings on valid cognition or epistemology. Whereas this mind and mental factors, I think, mainly comes from Abhidharma texts. You know, I think it's the main source is the Abhidharma, I think, is one point. But another is like, so that's one thing. But another is, I think, you know, if the other is more like, I call it epistemology, which is knowing how we know. This is a little bit different. This is more like psychology, actually. It's like looking at more like when they say mental factors, right? What they're getting at is like, what, you know, they talk about mind and mental factors. Mind is like there's a main mind that's accompanied by many mental factors, right? And And what this is getting at is like, how does our mind engage with things? And some of the mental factors are the mental afflictions, right? Some of them are virtuous. Some of them are like accompanying things, like how do you pay attention? How do you, memory, sleep, and so on. There are many kinds of mental factors, and we're going to go through them. And so this material is, it's like getting at that. It's getting at like, in your life as you experience it, you know, what are the factors or qualities of your mind that that affect how you engage with things, and also that create happiness and suffering. And I think this material actually is like, it's really quite useful in the sense of like, really almost more like, I mean, we've been doing this already, but it's like a, I'm just trying to give an example of what I'm getting at here. It's like a user's manual for your mind, in a way. You know, like, yeah, how does the mind work? How do you do it? You know, like how do you work? Yeah, what's going on? And anyway, you'll see it's quite useful. And it's like, these are actually tools for introspection. You know, very, very useful tools for introspection in terms of like really noticing different parts or aspects of your own mind. So I find this material quite useful, and I think it's the most, I don't know, like I was saying this in another class, but I thought nobody's really done that. Like, there are texts on this material, Mind and Mental Factors. There are quite a few books that have been published about it, but I think nobody's really done a book yet. Like, I actually think this is the material that we, as a psychologist, I think this is the material that will be most useful in terms of like psychology. So I think someday somebody should do that. You know, actually like describe how this applies to the process of psychology itself. But I just thought it might be fun to start, this time, to start with his, so Yeshe Gelson starts with a quite beautiful introduction that's not yet getting into the main subject matter. So I thought maybe we could just look at that for a few minutes. So that's it's in his text, which again, it was already, it's there, or you can just download it if you don't have it already. But I'm going to start on page 6, which is where the actual text starts. And thanks. And he just starts quite beautifully. So he said, this is Yeshe Gelson. So he says, I prostrate and go for refuge at all times to the feet of the holy venerable Guru, who is inseparable from the protector Manju Gosha. Please always take care of me with your great kindness. So that's his first verse, right? And what's he doing there actually? Is he saying he's prostrating to his own Guru, right? Saying that his Guru, that he views his Guru as inseparable from Manjushri. Manjushri is the Buddha of wisdom, right? So I want to pause there, right? Like, actually, just that, actually, it's funny. I was thinking about this yesterday when I was looking at it. Like, that alone, you could like, one could look at that for a long time, isn't it? Because that, actually, that's the first point of the Lamrim, isn't it? Seeing the Guru, you know, seeing the qualities of the Guru, proper devotion to the Guru. And the ultimate expression of that would be seeing the Guru as inseparable from the Buddha, right? So he's starting, you know, it could seem like a very simple thing that he's starting with, but actually it's quite profound, right? He's seeing his Guru as inseparable from Manjushri. Actually, I'll just share this. This is a tangent totally, but I was just the other day, I was texting back and forth with an elder nun who's a friend, an old friend. And she had done a lot of long retreat. And I was asking her about her experience at retreat. And she was saying, just from her own experience, she was, I won't say who it is, but she was saying that it was this point. She said, seeing the Guru as inseparable from the Buddha and seeing your own mind as inseparable from both. In her experience, that was the key to having some kind of Dharma realizations, which is what the teachings say. But she was saying that was her own experience. So this one point, right, that he takes refuge at all times in his holy venerable Guru, Jetsun Lama, right, who is inseparable from the protector of Manjushri, and asking his Guru to always take care of him with great kindness. I actually think you could say that the whole path is encapsulated in a way in that one verse. You could think about that for years, right? Like, that's Guru Yoga, actually. So anyway, that's very profound. Then he says, next verse is his praise to Shakimuni Buddha. So he says, you have completed the 2 collections through the force of exalted compassion. So actually, what are the 2 collections? Right? The collection of wisdom, right? And then the collection of merit. And then he makes a point here. He says, through the force of exalted compassion, right? And that's like, what he's getting at there is it's very similar to what Chandrakirti says at the very beginning of the Madhyamaka Avatara, and supplements the middle way or entering the middle way. You know, at the very beginning of that text on emptiness, right? Main topic is emptiness. Chandrakirti says, I praise compassion, right? Because compassion, he said, they're both making the same point, which is exalted compassion is the source, right, of the 2 collections. Because it's mainly through compassion that we accumulate merit, right, by helping others and through love and compassion. But also compassion is the motivation behind seeking wisdom, right, to benefit others. So compassion is the root, and then the 2 collections are what give rise to Buddhahood, right? But they come from compassion, right? Chandrakirti says compassion is essential in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, right? At the beginning, it's what begins our path. In the middle, it's like what waters, you know, the crops. And he says, even at the end, when you're a Buddha, it's compassion that allows you to benefit others, right? So compassion is important in all times. And then he says, eliminating obscuring darkness and know all phenomena, right? So the Buddha has eliminated all the obscurations and is omniscient, knows all phenomena. So clarifying what you yourself have seen for migrating beings, I bow to the unsurpassed refuge, Lord Muni, right? So Muni is like Shakimuni, right? And Muni is usually translated as like, actually it's interesting. In Sanskrit, that's Munindra. You'll sometimes see that phrase, Munindra. So Muni is like Shakimuni, right? It means the sage. Usually they translate that. And Indra is like Lord, right? Like actually it's the name of one of the deities, right? In Hinduism. But it's like, so like Lord of the sages. And then he praises Maitreya. He says, due to your earnest, single-pointed love. And remember, Maitri is love, right? In Tibetan, that's Jampa. Okay, so Jampa or Maitri. So he says, due to your earnest, single-pointed love for migrating beings, you are not renowned as the protector Maitri in all times. To the regent of the conqueror, the protector Ajita, I pay homage with a mind of heartfelt respect. And a few quick points here. One is, so the regent of the conqueror, right? Why? Because Maitreya is the next Buddha, right? And so they say when Shakimuni Buddha was right before he came to the earth, he was like teaching in Tushita, Pure Land, right? Which is Ganden in Tibetan, Tushita in Sanskrit. So he was teaching in Tushita, Pure Land. And they say like he was going to come to the earth, and then he appointed Maitreya. He said, now you'll take over teaching here in Tushita. I'm going to the earth, you know, and you'll be next to come to the earth as a Buddha. So in the sense, he's the regent of the conqueror in Tushita, and he's the next Buddha who's going to come. One other point here is it says protector Ajita. And I was looking this up. Ajita means unconquerable. And I thought it was quite beautiful. Is what it says is, what does it mean unconquerable? And what it's saying, he's called that because love cannot be conquered. I think it's quite, isn't that a beautiful way to think of that, right? That love is unconquerable, which is the Buddhist, right? And remember, I always get very touched by that. We think of like the Buddha on the night of his enlightenment when he was being, they say he was attacked by Mara's hordes, right? And that then when Mara's hordes of demons were attacking him, he meditated on the meditation of great love, right? And there's those beautiful tankas that if you've ever seen them, where like, you know, the demons throw arrows or spears, and you see the spears coming, and then as it gets close to the Buddha, they become flowers and fall at his feet. And what they say is because of that's, you know, it's a metaphor, right, for the power of love. That love transforms aggression into something beautiful. So that's the idea. Love is unconquerable. Actually, and then right then there's a, you know, why is the Buddha touching the earth, right? They say that he touched the earth, and Mother Earth herself, right, bore witness, and basically bore witness to his love. and said, Mara, you cannot conquer him. He deserves, he's destined for enlightenment because I've seen it for eons. He's practiced love. So love is unconquerable according to Buddhism. Actually, I'll ask you just to think about it. Do you believe that love is unconquerable? It's the Buddhist worldview. Like I think sometimes I think it's what's that is the Buddhist worldview, right? It's not always. I don't know. There are other cultures have different worldviews, right? That aggression is unconquerable, or weapons, nuclear weapons are unconquerable. Anyway, according to Buddhism, it's love. That's unconquerable. Then he says, you have been predicted by the Sugata himself. Sugata is an epithet of the Buddha, right? And sometimes it's translated as well gone one. Gate is gone, right? So sometimes it's translated as well gone one, or sometimes it's translated as one gone to bliss. Anyway, there are different translations for Sugata, but it's a phrase referring to the Buddha. It says, so you have been predicted by the Sugata himself. Clarify the excellent systems of the profound and the extensive, and are greatly renowned as the great trailblazers. I prostrate to the 6 ornaments and the 2 supremes of Jambudvipa. So that's referring to like the great trailblazers. Usually that refers to Nagarjuna and Arya Asanga. Nagarjuna, trailblazer meaning open the vehicle, right? Open, like Nagarjuna blazed the trail of Majjhimaka, and Asanga blazed the trail of the mind-only school, you could say. They opened that, like they opened those trails. It'd be like if you're opening a new trail in the woods or something. They opened those pathways. And then below it describes who are the 6 ornaments and the 2 supremes, right? So the 6 ornaments it lists below in the footnote. The 2 ornaments listed here of the Majjhimaka are Nagarjuna and his student Aryadeva. The 2 ornaments of here it says of Abhidharma, it could also be of mind only, but Asanga and Vasubandhu. And then the ornaments of Pramana are Dignaga and Dharmakirti. Right? So these are like among the great Indian pandits. Right? He's praising them. You get the point here. Yeshe Gyaltsen's praising these teachers. And then the 2 supreme ones are Acharya Shakyaprabha and Gunaprabha, who mainly taught very profoundly on the Vinaya, the codes of ethics. I want to go off on a very short tangent. It won't take long, but I think one of the great innovations is like one of the contributions to Buddhist studies of the current there are many of these, but one of the current Dalai Lama is, for centuries, they've talked about these 6 ornaments and 2 supreme ones. Right? And then His Holiness the Dalai Lama created a new list. He said the 17 pandits of Nalanda. Basically, he wants people to study, right? So he said, yes, there are the 6 ornaments and the 2 supreme ones, but he added 9 more. So he's trying to encourage people to study more. So he has the Dalai Lama lists those 6 ornaments and 2 supreme ones, and then he adds Chandrakirti, Buddhapalada, Shantarakshita, Kamalashila, Haribhadra, Vibhuktisena, Shantideva, Atisha, and Baba Viveka. And he says, so the current Dalai Lama would praise all 17, I think, here. And noting they're all connected to Nalanda Monastic University, right? So anyway, the point here is like, what's Yeshe Gyaltsen doing, right? He's praising the lineage, right? His guru and the lineage, right? From Shakimuni Buddha through Maitreya to the great pandits of India. And then the next verse, he praises Tsongkhapa, Lama Tsongkhapa. He says, in this land surrounded by snow mountains. That's, by the way, that line, in the land surrounded by snow mountains, that's also in the long life prayer to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right? Gangri, Rawe, the Gangri is the snow mountains, right? The land of snow mountains, that's Tibet, right? So in this land surrounded by snow mountains, referring to Tibet, you cause the grove of the 1,000-petaled lotuses of the sutras and the tantras and their commentaries to bloom anew, and are worthy of praise equal to the sun. The conqueror, I bow down to the Lama Protector Manjughosha. And Lama Protector Manjughosha is an epithet of Tsongkhapa because Tsongkhapa is considered to be an emanation or an incarnation of Manjushri also. And that's why if you see the tankas of Tsongkhapa, he's depicted with those implements, right? The sword on one side and the Prajnaparamita text on the other, because those are the implements of Manjushri, and so that symbolizes in part his being an emanation of Manjushri. And then Yeshi Gelson returns to praising his guru. He says, merely seeing the light rays of your exalted activities, the eye of awareness seeing the excellent path is illuminated. May the venerable guru, the light of the day maker, referring to the sun, right? The sun makes it daytime, always abide at the lotus stamens of my heart. Right? So he's asking his guru always to stay in his heart. And actually, you can take that as a very general phrase, right? May you always be in my heart, to your guru. Or there's even I think that I personally think, it doesn't say in the commentary, but I think that also the lotus stamen of my heart can refer to a tantric meaning of the guru being in the heart chakra, to evoke the clear light experience. I think so, but true. Then he says, although others will not benefit from a discourse such as one such as me, for the sake of enhancing my mind's familiarity with the excellent explanations, and due to having been exhorted by others, I shall write a little on the modes of mind and mental factors in accordance with the texts on knowledge, the Abhidharma. So actually, that's Yeshi Gelson expressing his own humility, right? Saying, oh, I don't have any qualities, but actually, that's funny. I was just this morning thinking, when I was thinking of starting this, I thought, well, I don't know if I have much to say about it, but it'll help me become more familiar with this material. So that's good. So I was thinking that way. It's an interesting material that's good to engage with, And he's saying that by writing it, he thought he would get to know the material better. And as I mentioned earlier, this material comes from the Abhidharma. I just think, so I went over that, I think that's a beautiful praise to start. It was quite touching, I thought. And now he gets at something very interesting, which he's going to get it into this whole section, which is why study this, right? He actually is going to address that issue. And so he says, intelligent beings, right? So what does it mean to be intelligent here? And actually, sometimes intelligent beings refers to bodhisattvas in Buddhist texts, or it can refer to beings who are discriminating, intelligent, But I want to point out, he's going to define intelligent being here in an interesting way, so we can see, are we intelligent or not, right? We can check for ourselves. He says, intelligent beings who have in mind their welfare in future lives, not being content simply with acquiring food and clothing for the duration of this life, thinking what will become of me in future births, should wonder, I have circled powerlessly in the three realms of cyclic existence since beginningless time, continuously experiencing suffering. What is the root of this? Having contemplated in this manner, you must come to understand that these sufferings of samsara, cyclic existence, neither arise without a cause, nor arise from a discordant cause. Rather, they arise from their own causes. Actions, meaning karma, and mental afflictions, right, meaning kleshas. So actually, we're going to pause there. He's getting at something, again, I think he's very profound just in his introduction, right? What does it mean to be intelligent? He's saying it doesn't mean that you're, it's not your grades in school, it's not your income, or like your job or something like that. He's saying it's that you're asking deep questions, right? You're saying, he says, if you're intelligent, then you're asking, wait a second, like it's not enough. When he says simply acquiring food and clothing, he's getting at the worldly concerns, right? Or is that you're saying, oh, an intelligent person thinks, wait a second, the purpose of my life can't just be that I try to like have as much comfort and praise and sort of wealth as possible until I die, until I drop dead. And actually, he would say that's not intelligent. So from his perspective, it's funny. From his perspective, right, like many of the people our culture thinks of as intelligent would be foolish, right? Like if you thought, oh, I want to create, if you thought the purpose of my life is to get billions of dollars to buy Twitter or something, then that would not be intelligent according to him, right, or whatever. Any such endeavor would not be an intelligent use of human life, right? He's saying it's not enough to do that. That we should be thinking. He says an intelligent person would think, what will happen to me in future lives? And I'm suffering in samsara. right? The three realms, and they're the three realms, right, are the form realm, the formless realm, and the desire realm. We're in the desire realm, right? We're stuck in the desire realm through our mental afflictions. But all three of those are samsara, right? He says, and we're continually experiencing suffering, and you would look for the cause of suffering, right? And when you look for the cause of suffering, right, when you contemplate in this manner, you would come to understand, this is an important point, right, that the causes of cycle existing, that the sufferings of samsara, all the sufferings that exist, first of all, they don't arise without any cause, right? And secondly, they don't come from a discordant cause. And he would say you'd find that they come from, what is the cause of those? It's mental afflictions, right, the kleshas, and karma, right? That's the cause of samsara. And what he's getting at, I just want to say here, the implication is, this text is about how do you overcome that, right? This text is about how do you identify those causes in your own being and how do you overcome them. So he's saying that, he's implying here, there's a deep purpose to studying this text. It's not just for intellectual knowledge. It's not just to, this text is not to help you become whatever, more powerful in this life or more influential or get more whatever. It's for that purpose of discovering in your own being the causes of suffering and how to overcome them. So then he quotes the protector Nagarjuna in his precious garland. He says, as long as the aggregates, right, the five aggregates, are misconceived, there will be the conception of an I. When there is conception of an I, there is also action, meaning karma. Due to that, there is rebirth. Right? So as long as we grasp at an I, we create karmic actions. Right? And as long as we create karmic actions, we're reborn in samsara. And this text is about how do you overcome that. So then you start to go, wow, I really want to study this text, don't I? Like, in other words, if I want to be free, you start to go, oh, that's really quite important. I can become liberated from self-grasping and karma and liberated from samsara. That's quite something. Then he quotes, again, Nagarjuna from a different text, the Mula Majjhamaka, the Majjhamaka Shastra, the treatise on the middle way. He says, the root of cyclic existence is compositional actions, meaning karma, right? Therefore, the wise do not create compositional actions. Hence, the unwise are creators. The wise are not, because of seeing thusness, emptiness, right? So again, so the root of cyclic existence is karma, here he's saying, right? But karma is created because one hasn't seen thusness or emptiness, right? The nature of reality. And what does that mean? That the wise are, the unwise create karma, right? So due to the power of ignorance, we have mental afflictions. Due to our mental afflictions, we create karmic actions that lead to suffering. And the unwise, actually, it's interesting. He says the wise don't create compositional actions. The wise are creative, but they don't create, so the wise beings, right? Like bodhisattvas, actually, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Like, I think the wise here can refer to bodhisattvas or Buddhas, is my own interpretation now. Because Buddhas don't create any karma, but bodhisattvas, once you've seen emptiness directly, you don't create throwing karma anymore, right? You don't create karma that throws you into samsara. And actually, enlightened, bodhisattvas create Buddha realms, right? So they're creative, but they don't create samsara, you could say. So the wise don't create samsara because they don't create compositional actions, meaning samsara, karma for samsara, samsaric karma. John has a comment to the question.
Yeah, I have to look back at the test, so bear with me. I don't have it printed out. But the term I wanted to ask about, I think it's called compositional actions. Did I miss something? Is that defined somewhere? Because that sounds like it's rather critical. And it sounds like most of us do it, or I know I do it. But yeah. What actually is it?
Here, what they're getting, when the root, when it says the root of cyclic existence is compositional actions, what he's referring to is karmic. The commentary said karma. So that's so in other words, actions here is the Sanskrit word karma means action. So it's referring to, and specifically, it would be karma created through the power of self-grasping, or under the influence of self-grasping. So, and that it's differentiating, because there's sometimes there are different categories of karma, but one way of categorizing karma is impure. Impure karma, which can include both positive and negative karma. So even positive karma can be impure and can be a compositional action in the sense that it still can throw one into samsara. And then there's a pure, they sometimes talk about pure karma. That's karma that's not under the influence of self-grasping. So in my view, interpretation here, compositional actions would be karma created under the influence of self-grasping.
Okay, so it's really back to the self-grasping concept of us holding on to things in samsara.
Yep. Yeah,
And
holding on to
that
us.
as you
Yep.
become more enlightened, you less and less are grasping. Okay, so it's a terminology or a translation issue. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So it's referring to that
I
kind of
never heard
thing.
the term before, so
No, it's good to ask. Yeah. So, but yeah, the commentary said it's referring to karma, and in this case, it's clear here from the context. It means, yeah, karma created under the influence of self-grasping. And then we have a few more minutes. We'll keep going. So then it says Acharya Aryadeva, who is the disciple of Nagarjuna, right? We were just quoting Nagarjuna, says in his 400 stanzas, says, the consciousness that is the seed of cyclic existence, meaning of karma, of samsara rather, has objects as its activity, right? So again, it's getting at grasp. Here it's not just self-grasping, it also here Aryadeva was pointing out objects as grasping. It means that your grasp of its activity means you're grasping at self-existent objects. That's the implication there. So grasping at a self-existent aggregates, grasping at self-existence, internal and external things, we then, that kind of consciousness, and actually it's getting at, if he really was getting at here is the 12 links of dependent origination, right? And at the first link is ignorance, right? And this is getting at what we're, this idea of compositional actions also. It comes from the 12 links actually. So that the first link is ignorance, and the second link is compositional actions, which is karma created under the influence of that kind of ignorance. So here, that's what these verses also getting at, are the first two of the 12 links of dependent origination, which are what give rise to samsara. And then Chandrakirti in his Majjhimaka Avatara says that the very diverse worlds of sentient beings and their environments are established by mind itself. It is taught that all migrating beings without exception are born from actions. And so again, he's making the same kind of point here, but what he's getting at is that all experiences come from karma, but karma is mainly created by the mind, right? Because remember also, like karma, the main factor in karma is intention, right? Which we're going to get at in this text, by the way. What is intention? Intention is a mental factor, actually. So we'll cover what that means. So all the diverse worlds of sentient beings and their environments are established by the mind itself. It is taught that all migrating beings without exception are born from actions, right? And so anyway, there are different ways to interpret that, but one way to interpret that is, of course, that our experience of the world is created by our mind, of course, or conditioned by our mind. But another is that, more subtle way is that due to the mind being under the influence of self-grasping, we create karma. Karma causes us to take rebirth within samsara, and therefore we experience different worlds and different realms. We're right now experiencing the human realm. Sometimes we experience other realms, right, of existence, and all that is established through the power of our own mind. So again, what's he getting at? Well, we're going to study the mind now, right? So we need to, if we want to be free from samsara, we need to understand our mind. See, so that's the implication of all these. He's quoting these great Buddhist masters to say, this is why we need to understand our mind. Then he quotes Acharya Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha, Karika. So he says the various worlds are produced from actions. So he's just showing that all the Buddhist masters agree, all the great masters of Nalanda agree on this. And he says the root of cyclic existence is the 6 subtle increasers. And those are the 6 root delusions. So you might say, what are the 6 root delusions, right? So then if you're reading this text, you might go, what are the 6 root delusions? Then you think, oh, wow, they're going to be taught in this text. I'm quite excited to study it. So And that's, you see what he's doing here, right? He's showing this is why we're going to study this material, right? That's how these are those 6 root delusions, which are ignorance is among them, are the very cause of every moment of suffering I've ever had or anyone else has ever had. So let me learn what those are. Let me learn more about the 6 root delusions. This text teaches those. Then he says, many such statements have been taught. Likewise, Shantideva in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara says, the propounder of the truth, right, referring to the Buddha, has taught that in this way all fears and immeasurable sufferings arise from the mind, right? And so again, why so that's Shantideva, right? All fear, all suffering, all the immeasurable sufferings come from the mind. So so you see that I just think Yeshe Gelson's quite wonderful, right? So we're saying, why are you studying this? This is why. It's not just for some intellectual knowledge. It's not just for entertainment. It's not just for no reason, right? It's that the mind is the source of happiness and suffering. So we need a user's manual for our mind. This text is it. And he's saying that's why we're studying it. Then he said, and then he continues quoting Shantideva. He says, those who do not understand this secret of the mind, the great objective of the Dharma, wander aimlessly, even though they wish to attain happiness and destroy suffering. Therefore, I should hold well and guard this mind of mine. Right? And so you see again, it's obvious, right? He's getting at the profundity of, if we want to stop wandering aimlessly, we need to learn about our mind. And he continues, Shantideva, physical suffering, mental unhappiness, the various kinds of fear, as well as separation from what one desires, arise from committing misdeeds. By performing virtues intended in the mind, right? And remember I said, because karma is intention, right? Ultimately, what creates the karma is our intention, which we're going to get into. What does that mean, intention? It's in here. It's one of the mental factors, right? But misdeeds, meaning negative karma, and also virtues are created by intention, right? So physical suffering, mental unhappiness, various kinds of fear, as well as separation from what one desires, arise from misdeeds. By performing virtues intended in the mind, wherever I go, due to those merits, I shall be honored with the excellences that are the results. Although one who commits misdeeds wishes for happiness, wherever he or she goes, those misdeeds will completely destroy them with weapons of suffering. As a result of virtue, the spiritual children of the Sugatas come to dwell in the hearts of vast, fragrant, and cool lotuses. The nourishment of the conqueror's pleasant speech causes their splendor to increase. Their supreme bodies emerge from lotuses that unfold due to the light of the munis. They abide in the presence of the conquerors. As a result of the many non-virtues, my condition will be wretched due to my skin being ripped off by the henchmen of Yama. Molten copper melted by tremendous heat will be poured into my body. Pierced by flames of swords and daggers, my flesh will be cut into hundreds of pieces. I shall plummet upon the fiercely blazing iron ground. I'll just read this last paragraph. So just as been said above, all of cyclic existence, so all of samsara, the environments and its inhabitants, arises through the force of its own causes, actions, and afflictions. This has been taught not just once, but again and again in the sutras and tantras, as well as their commentaries. Likewise, it has been taught that all the excellent qualities of the paths and grounds of the 3 vehicles, the resultant Buddha field, the exalted bodies of a Buddha, lifespan and deeds, as well as exalted activities, arise solely from their own causes, wholesome, virtuous minds. Therefore, the root of all cyclic existence in nirvana is established to be the mind itself. So I just want to pause there before we will stop in a minute, but do you get what I just think it's what he's getting at here, right? I just want to connect it for a moment, because I don't know, sometimes it's easy with a text to be distant, but what he's saying actually is an expression of compassion, I think, for us, for sentient beings like us, right? And what he's saying is we're usually distracted, right? And as intelligent beings look at what's meaningful, but we often get distracted, don't we? By all kinds of things. And what he's saying is like, right now we have a precious human rebirth. And actually it's unbearable. If you think of the incredible suffering that beings go through, right? I mean, he's talking about horrible sufferings there, but actually, like, think about, oh my gosh, I mean, think about the suffering of yourself, right? Of all the sufferings you've gone through. That's self-compassion, isn't it? If you think about those and you think, I don't want to continue like that. And then you think of the sufferings others go through. Right? And he gives example, right? Losing those we love, all kinds of losing things we want, getting sick, and so on, right? War and pandemics and all the kinds of suffering in the world. And he's saying all those sufferings, right? Whether it's your own personal suffering or the suffering of people in Ukraine, the suffering of, all the different kinds of suffering that happen, right? We're subject to them. And all of that is because of our minds. Right? But we don't ever look at our minds, is what he's saying, right? Like, even though the mind is the source of happiness and suffering. And he's saying, it's up to you. Like, you have control now. Right? If you don't take control of your mind, you'll be thrown, right, without any choice, into more suffering. And if you do take control of your mind, he gives us, right, he says, you'll be born from a lotus, Shanti Devas, right? He's getting at, you'll be in the presence of the enlightened ones, right? You'll be enlightened yourself. And it's all in our control while we have this precious human rebirth. So he's saying, these are the reasons to study the mind, right? So he's saying, I'm about to teach on the mind and mental factors, is what Geshe Gelsen's saying. And he's saying, like, this is not, if we are intelligent in our approach, we recognize, I want to understand my mind because I want to be free from suffering. And being free from suffering means understanding the causes of suffering. And those are in my mind. And so this text is like a guide, is what he's saying, right? To understanding what are those causes of suffering in my mind and how do I overcome them. So anyway, I think it's quite a beautiful introduction. So I wanted to start with just that introduction. That's getting at, why bother studying this? It's that's the reason. John, yeah.
Again, I asked many silly or ignorant questions. So is he saying that the teaching what he's about to share with us in this text is something that he took from somewhere else? Because what you just said is a rather powerful statement to say that, I'm going to try to teach you in 90 pages or 80 pages how to truly take control of your mind, and which will then allow us to better understand suffering and then, go through the Four Noble Truths.
Yep.
So is this supposed to be his interpretation of other people? Because he's already talked about his guru and other great teachers.
Yeah, so if you look back, actually, he answers that question where he says on the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7, he praises all the Buddha and past lineage masters, and then he says, due to having been exhorted by others, I shall write a little on the modes of minds and mental factors in accordance with the texts on knowledge, Abhidharma. So what he's saying, he's saying he's going to write about mind and mental factors, mainly basing it on previous Lama's teachings from Abhidharma. So so he answers that question. So he says he's sort of saying there, I'm not going to make this up. Geshe Gelsen saying, I'm not just making something up. I'm going to base my presentation of this in this text on the Abhidharma lineage. So and that and the Abhidharma lineage comes through Vasubandhu to a large extent. The one that they study in Tibet most is Vasubandhu's Abhidharma. So he's going to base it on Abhidharma. Yeah.
So his goal is to basically take the teachings that he's been or had shared with him by his gurus and his teachers and try to make it into something slightly more digestible than several thousand pages.
Yeah, because if you look at like the Abhidharma text, if you look at the Abhidharma text,
right? That's what I said. Every time I've ever seen these things, I remember we had a lot of them on the walls up in Milarepa in Vermont, and they covered an entire wall of the Gampa.
Yeah, and if you read some of the Abhidharma texts, also, they're wonderful, but without it, they're very hard to understand. Actually, so like he's also so as you just said, he's making it digestible because so he's taking this material from the Abhidharma, and he's going to sort of present it in a way that makes it more easily accessible. So then if you want to, you can go read the Abhidharma and it'll be easier to understand it, for example, because if you study Yeshe Gelsen's text and then you go to that section of the Abhidharma, if you just look at the Abhidharma on its own, it'll be more difficult. But if you study his text and then you go look at the Abhidharma, it'll be much easier. Yeah.
Last question. When was this written? Does it have the approximate year?
He lived in the 1700s.
Okay. So
Yeah, he was like the
18th century.
contemporary of Thomas Jefferson, you could say, or something.
Yeah, so relatively recent then, actually.
Yeah, from a
Thank
Buddhist
you.
perspective, that's relatively recent. That's
Yeah, I
right.
would say it's brand new.
Yeah, practically, right? Not the 1100s or the 1400s. Yeah.
Which is what I always think we tend to study a lot from the 1100s and 1200s, not from the 1800s.
No, yeah, because he was a teacher of the 8th Dalai Lama, so yeah, it's more recent. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, I know we're a couple minutes over. So anyway, so I guess we'll stop. Oh, Anna, sorry. Take your question.
I have a short questions.
That's okay.
Just I'm thinking you say mind, the action, all action comes from mind, right? So if a person have a self-grasping mind, even he's doing some virtuous action, that would be useless, right? Because you are self-grasping mind, then the virtual action will not be pure.
It's not totally useless because, in other words, if you think of like a virtuous action done with self-grasping creates a good future rebirth. So it still gives a better rebirth in the future, but it's within samsara. That's the problem. In other words, so a good action done with self-grasping is not totally useless because it leads to a good rebirth, like as a human being or a god, but it's still within samsara.
Okay.
So if you do virtue with self-grasping, the result is samsaric happiness or samsaric well-being, but it won't get beyond samsara. So we have to do it with awareness of without self-grasping, then that's the only thing that can take us out of samsara. So yeah, so good actions done with self-grasping lead to good rebirth, but still samsaric suffering.
Thank you.
Yeah. But and let's do we'll do the dedication and just remind everybody it's on the calendar already, but there won't be classes in May, so we'll start up in June with these this text in detail. So in June starts, but the supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you, the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chinrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. And I dedicate all these virtuous merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the I, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, or lead all sentient beings who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Great
Lauren.
introduction to the mind teachings. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah,
Thank you, Lauren.
thanks, Wilmy. Good to see you.
Thank you so much.